As you gentlemen know, and members of the public know, I was in Washington, D.C. last week, and what I did was to go with tribal representatives and let you know who I went with. It was Kippy Robbins, who's on the Tribal Council, was myself, George Smith, who is their executive director, Brett Kenny, who is the tribe's attorney, Tim Bredenberg, who's their natural resources director, and John Gordon was also there. He's a forestry consultant and the retired dean of forestry for the Yale School of Forestry. And he also worked on the original Northwest Forest Plan. The reason we went to Washington, D.C. was to see if there was practicality in our memorandum of understanding. If and when we get it completed and we can agree on the tenets of the memorandum, which were pretty much detailed in that 2008 resolution by this board, we needed to make sure that there is going to be some level of a legislative path available to us to be able to exercise this and make it work. So with that in mind, we went to detail the concept to a number of folks in Washington. We talked to the staff for the resource committees for both Congress and the Senate. We talked to the forestry liaison for the Bureau of Indian Affairs. We talked to Bill Downs there at Bureau of Indian Affairs. We also talked to Ethan Pittleman, who was the representative for Kurt Schrader. We talked to Senator Wyden's staff. We talked to Congressman DeFazio's staff. And once again, we were just talking in broad brush terms about what this type of management agreement would be. Shared management by the county and the tribe, shared revenue 50-50. Would a management idea be able to work in Washington? Was there a level of support for that? Would anyone be willing to help us work on this? And the good news was no one told us no, which is a good thing in Washington. We have significant work to do to be able to get it in legislative form to at least allow the path. There's a number of things happening in Washington right now. Senator Wyden's staff is working diligently to reauthorize SRS payments. They said that's their principal goal right now. The current attitude in Washington, that's going to be an uphill push because of the way the funding is. If we can get SRS renewed, it will probably be 1 year only, and certainly at a reduced rate. If anything, this trip to Washington crystallized the fact that we need to establish local revenue that is locally under our control because of the way everything's going in Washington. So it really drove home strongly that we need to develop these types of source of funds to keep us going. And that's what this agreement would do if we can make this all work and if we can find a legislative path for it. There will be a resource hearing on the congressional level on September 22nd, I believe, coming up. And now the type of bill that's going to be, nobody knows exactly for sure, but it will be a forest bill and it will affect in some way management of federal forests. So we're going to stay abreast of that, and we may even want to participate as far as testimony at that hearing. We're not sure yet because we don't know exactly what's going to be brought up there. We were informed that there were at least 4 other project pilots that were being proposed throughout the United States, which is good for us because that means if those project pilots are included in whatever legislation that comes up, we might also have the opportunity to be included as a project pilot. As you gentlemen know, there's 2 plans currently floating on the House side. One is Congressman Walden's, one is Congressman DeFazio's. They are both management plans. They both have significant hurdles to overcome. The one talks about splitting basically the O&C lands in half, having an environmental oversight trust on one side and a management production trust on the other side. It was very interesting to talk to Travis Josephs, who is a staffer for Congressman DeFazio. We had a good meeting with him. The way that the congressman is looking at this now, according to Travis, is they are thinking about treating all federal lands the same, O&C lands, wagon road lands. It was expressed to us that they didn't feel that the wagon road lands were any more special than the O&C lands, and the way they're looking at this now is they're talking about lumping the wagon road lands in with the O&C lands, which I had a problem with. And we talked about that because we feel these lands are special, and they're special by statute, and they had been administered in a much different way, and much different than the way these lands are comprised. So that's just one of the things we're looking at.
Yeah, they shouldn't have been combined in the first place.
No, exactly.
Because one's resource and one's ad valorem.
Most definitely. It's a totally different setup between the two lands. I think this is basically an educational challenge for us to be able to go and educate folks as the way these lands were set up and why it is so important for us to be able to establish a local management form and source of revenue. Because Travis said to me, he said, well, gee, the counties really don't care where they get their money from as long as they get their money. But for me personally, and I think for you gentlemen too, I'm not going to speak for you, but I think it's incredibly important to us where we get our money from, because the reason we're in Washington, the reason we're talking about this, is because this has been thrown once again in turmoil. Every year, we've sat here before, you've been here, Bob, before I and Fred, and it's Armageddon time. Every year we look at what is handed down to us by the federal government, maybe through no fault of our congressmen, no fault of our senators, but what happens in the bigger picture directly affects us. We have no control over that, so to speak. A local management plan would give us control over that.
What would we rather have? This handout, because we're not cutting trees from the federal government, or we'd rather have people cutting trees and being back to work, and then it benefits the county because the ONC, we get the receipts based, 50% of the receipts. It's obvious, instead of just getting a handout from the feds, we'd like to have the jobs.
Well, it was my
then we get the money too. I mean,
It was my contention that we didn't want checks written to ourselves anymore. We wanted jobs, because we felt the jobs money rolls out many more times than a check from the federal government as far as having a positive impact on the economy and the folks of Coos County.
And when I was over, Fred and I went and listened to Representative Walden over in Roseburg, it was what, a month and a half? Almost 2 months ago.
About 2 months ago.
About 2 months ago now. And Lane County Commissioner Fay Stewart was talking about the jobs that would be added if the ONC lands went back into production without the whopper or without the whatever previous forest plan, where they were just allowed to cut at a modest level. He was talking about 25,000 jobs added to the Oregon economy. I mean, when you have zero job growth in the last quarter, which was announced last week, what last Thursday or Friday? And only 15,000 jobs total in the United States the quarter before, 25,000 jobs is huge. They could easily do that in the timber industry, as well as all the suppliers for cable, for, machinery, Caterpillar, you name it. All those folks that supply that industry, the logging trucks people, Kenworth, you name it, would be huge. And every senator or representative across the United States could point to, I was instrumental in adding 25,000 jobs this quarter. Huh?
Well, there's
we put people back to work, and then you get things like GE wants to send their X-ray thing over to China at $2 billion some dollars.
Well, there's tremendous immediate
do it here.
Impact if we can do this here. I mean, the jobs net to Coos County, the tribe's already been working on rolling out the economics on this, and the immediate jobs net to Coos County would be over 500 jobs, which is dramatic. Our close regional impact is over 1,500 jobs immediately would be added if we can secure a management agreement. And it's also critical for us to secure a management agreement in some way, shape, or form, just because of where SRS is now as far as being perceived by the legislature.
And because it's federal timber, it has to be milled here. It can't be shipped as logs overseas.
All right. So it puts us in a position of sustainability. I mean, plain and simple, sustainability. And once again, it would be under the Northwest Forest Plan, be under the Bureau of Indian Affairs, because that's what we have pushed forward, and a shared management agreement. No one gets the land. We're very clear about that, and that's been the focus since 2008.
Still be federal ownership.
Yes, still be federal ownership. It would simply be local management. So there's a lot of work to do. There's a lot of educational work to do. And a lot of outreach to do. But I think there is the possibility of a path, at least, If we can negotiate an agreement between ourselves and tribal council, I believe there is the possibility of a path for this legislation.
Now, what I talked about earlier a bit, no matter what, we fall back to the Act of 39 after September. That still doesn't help the county general fund.
Mm-mm.
None whatsoever. Want to make that really clear? The SRS funds of the $5 million we were getting from the federal government, not cutting trees, went straight in the general fund. The Wagon Road Act is only for roads, schools, and bridges, which goes into the county road department. Doesn't help the general fund a bit.
That's correct.
Yeah, go ahead.
No. So anyway, so once again, it was a good week. It was a busy week. We had meeting after meeting after meeting. But once again, no one said no. People were interested. I think on the House side, there's a lot of interest in a management plan, a negotiated management plan for our federal forests. And that's good for us. I think it's going to be a bit of an uphill push on the Senate side, but I think it's possible. I think that in the right set of circumstances, there's the potential for legislation to push through both houses that would allow us to work out a management agreement. Now, just as far as, once again, just before we leave to address where I am on working with the tribe, is that there is nothing that we are working on that isn't completely public already. I mean, as far as our desire to share 50% of the proceeds, our desire to share 50% of the management, our desire that neither party own the land. And that is basically what we're working on now. And as far as my understanding from this board direction and my original intentions to move this forward per our 2008 resolution, I was instructed by the board to move forward with members of the tribe and a member of the public and county council to draft a memorandum of understanding that would be presented publicly to our public bodies. And our public bodies being this Board of Commission, the public of Coos County, and the tribal council. And that's what we're working on doing. There's no quorum of any public body at these meetings. We're simply working on drafting a memorandum of understanding that will be presented to this body and the tribal governing body. And we're just working on that language. And once again, there's nothing in that agreement that the public isn't fully aware of already. I mean, we're just working out the basic language that surrounds what that memorandum would be. And you've seen what we're working on, Bob. You've seen, Fred, what we're working on. We're just trying to get it so it's very clear, very workable, and that would fit in the framework of federal legislation. So that's where we are. I was encouraged. I also realize there's tremendous work ahead to make anything like this happen. But if anything, the trip once again crystallized for me in so many ways that we have to do this. We have to do this. This is our path to sustainability for our county. It truly is. And also our path under some of the most rigorous oversight and environmental regulation that exists. And, you know, as I talk to folks on the federal level, I stressed that as a fish guy my entire life, somebody who works in watershed, fisheries, the one thing that I was consistently impressed by, you know, when I walk tribal land, when I walk our county land, our forest land, how well it's managed and how hard we look to protect species values and to protect watershed, and I think that's incredibly important. I addressed to the tribe that I would very much like to have them host a public tour of the Coquille Forest. They were very much in favor of that, because I think if people had the opportunity to get out there and walk those lands and see how they are managed, with the assistance of John Gordon, who's one of the preeminent foresters in the nation, I think they will be incredibly impressed at the level of management and oversight and water quality monitoring that exists on those lands. So we will make that happen. By the next board meeting, we'll have a date with the tribe so we can have a public tour of these lands, because I think the public needs to see what's going on out there because it's dramatic. And that same sort of overlay is what we would utilize if we're able to co-manage the Wagon Road lands, and I feel awfully good about that.
Just a little tidbit about that. I was listening to Jason Robinson, who's their biologist. He's into wildlife, fisheries, etc. I didn't realize they have all these monitors in the stream. They track all the water temperatures and all the time, which is not done very often.
Oh, it's dramatic, Bob. I'll tell you, I've spent the majority of my life stomping over a lot of watershed land because it's what I've done. And I've never seen anything that comes to the level of forest management that they've undertaken out there. I mean, the way they've created basically huge bioswales that filter water down to the watersheds, and the way that they address watershed management and multi-stage growth and biodiversity, because that's one of the most important things. I mean, if we're going to continue to grow timber on Oregon lands and be able to be sustainable, not just us as a county, but the entire state of Oregon, biodiversity has to be a huge part of what we consider. And that's why it's so important to have John Gordon involved with this, because he's a brilliant man. He's worked his entire life. He says 80 years. He's not quite that old, but he says he's worked the majority of his life on this and has been directly involved with these forest management plans that, if they were implemented as John helped design them, they'd have tremendous positive impact for both wildlife and the economy. They've never been implemented the way they were designed. The one place that they have been implemented is on the cocoa forest land, which is important to us as we move this forward on the federal level. But I think it could be a tremendous win-win for our county, for our folks, because it's our one path, once again, to sustainability. And I don't see that in many other places, certainly not at the level of funding that we would get out of this sort of a management plan. There's a lot of hurdles, certainly, before we can get to that point. But if we can make them, it'll be dramatic impact for all of us.
Now, you talked to DeFazio and Wyden, et cetera, and Wyden's talked about a one-year reauthorization at less than what we're getting the last payment?
In general, what they're talking about at the Senate level is that it's an uphill push for SRS reauthorization. If we get it at all, it would probably be for 1 year only, because it's going to be a very tough sell, and it may be at the 2009 level, maybe at the 2010 level. Nobody's worked that out yet.
Okay. And then DeFazio is talking about, 50% of the ONC lands going into total trust for environmental reasons.
Mm-hmm.
The other half being set up
under a management trust,
where they lease out for 99 years to whomever.
Right.
They put that money into a trust to pay counties.
Mm-hmm.
Now the ONC proposal, the ONC board, which I'm a member, that was the old proposal that they had several years ago. The new one is to put the entire ONC lands into a 9-person trust and then harvest up to 40% of the growth rate, no more than that. Which seems like that method would be the preferred method. And they're talking about having not just timber people on that board, but environmental folks too, an equal amount, but having some parameters, sideboards, what do you want to call it, where they're going to have a minimum harvest and only a maximum of the 40% of the growth rate.
Right, that's correct. My hope is...
And that would put, I don't like this idea of leasing it out for umpteen billions and putting that money somewhere in the stock market. It just bothers me. This trust in the stock market. There's too many shenanigans going on with the stock market. I'd rather see it where it's a direct source, where they log it, and each year it goes into a fund and then gets distributed out to the counties. And that way it's forever also.
Right. I think both plans have a lot of work to do. I mean, they got to get their work boots on to get either one of those plans to the point where they could be pushed out of the house right now. I mean, you guys know there's significant hurdles in just drawing lines. Where do you draw the lines? And I think that's one of the biggest questions. As you're aware, old growth is probably the principal concern of most environmentalists
and I'm not,
in the land across the board.
There's a place up Cherry Creek that's just amazing. It's like I told Ed Metcalf, the chair of the tribe, it's almost spiritual. I mean, you walk through that forest and there's 8, 10, 12 foot through trees that you just don't see anymore, and it's amazing. But there's another 59,000 acres out there that's been logged over several times that could be harvested. They're growing nice trees that are the size which industry that's been downsized to smaller logs can utilize and
most
keep
definitely.
people employed.
You know, and that was an important message to convey too, that there's not one of us, certainly sitting on this board, anybody in this community, who truly isn't a conservationist, environmentalist at heart. We love it here. We live here. You know, I think that says it all. And nobody wants to destroy the best of who we are. And I think that's why this is an important part of the plan that we're trying to work, the memorandum of understanding that we're trying to work on, would have significant protection in it and work under rigid environmental control. And the nice thing about it is the Coquille Tribe has proved that you can make money and still manage under those dictates. And that's a tremendous
Even
thing.
on the ONC plan, not only can they point to all the jobs at it, but 25% of the proceeds would go back to the feds, which would be revenue positive instead of this huge revenue negative they have all the time.
Well, that's the one good thing about both our plan and plans that are being put out, is that they are almost immediately revenue positive to the Treasury, because they reduce the management costs to the federal government almost immediately, would in most cases completely eliminate, you know, revenue checks having to be written to the county other than what's derived off the land itself. And they put people to work. I think most importantly, they put people to work. They create jobs. I mean, we've proved that we can create jobs. The tribe has proved that they can create jobs. And I think, if anything, it's a jobs creation program that has no cost to the federal government. And that's pretty amazing if you can pull something like that off. But I think we can.
Anything else?
No, that's it.
I think we covered it. We're adjourned.
Thank you.